Armed Services Committee. In addition to serving as vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. She is running for president to bring a soldier's heart to the White House. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Tulsi Gabbard.
Can you all please join me in thanking Trevor for his words and his volunteering? He is walking the talk, and I am grateful beyond words for him and so many other people who are here tonight, volunteers who are supporting our campaign, who are taking steps as he is to take personal sacrifices, not for me, but for our country and for our future, and understanding that the change that we want to see for our country, the change that we need to see for our future, it starts with every one of us doing what we can in our own way to make that positive impact. And I'm inspired every single day by Trevor and Dave and Vince and Nitya and so many of our volunteers here and across the country who are literally fueling our people-powered movement. They are one of the many things that I am grateful for as we begin this brand new, amazing year. Who's with me on this? Are we happy to be in 2020? Before we launch into our conversation tonight, I just wonder if you could help me thank John, who's the owner here. Thanks, John, for your help in hosting us all. Glad to have this space where we could hang out for a little while. So thank you again. Usually when we have these town halls, we start off, I say a few words, and we open it up to Q&A. I kind of want to mix it up a little bit, given it is January 1st of 2020. It is a monumental year. And the way Trevor started our conversation, I think, is a really good note to start our conversation on. I'm here both to be able to introduce myself to you if I have not had the chance to meet you yet, but I also look forward to being able to hear what is on your mind, to hear about what you are hopeful for as we go into this new year, and what kind of change you would like to see for our country, and maybe some ideas that you can share about how we together can be that change. Trevor talked about service above self. And when we look back to the vision that our founders had for this country, really they envisioned a nation with leaders who were solely focused on serving the people of this country, leaving the monarchy and coming to this nation, forming a new nation, led by a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Raise your hand if you feel that the founders would be proud of the government that we have today. That our government is living up to that vision, where our leaders are of, by, and for the people. I saw 2 hands raised. All right. I think one of the biggest challenges, in my opinion, and you can disagree, but in my opinion, so many of the challenges that we are dealing with can go back to the reality that we have a government that is of, by, and for the powerful elite that's left the vast majority of the people in this country behind. That in Washington, we have a pay-to-play culture that exists, where those who are sitting around the table, who are helping to write policies and influence legislation, are high-powered and high-paid lobbyists, people who are representing special interests or corporations or those who have the power and influence. And the reality of the lives that people all across this country are living, both the challenges, the struggles, the hopes, the dreams, are not being heard, are being left behind. Every single day, I am able to meet with people and hear from people who, in many ways, are struggling to survive, struggling to pay their health care bills, struggling to think about how they can afford their medicine, struggling to make ends meet, working paycheck to paycheck. Here in the United States of America, the wealthiest nation on the world, I believe we can do better. I believe that we must do better. And that the only way that we can really bring about this reality that our founders envisioned for us is by being that change ourselves, by exercising our right to vote, making sure that our voices are heard at the ballot box. When we look back through previous elections and the debates that surround these elections, oftentimes we've heard over and over and over again the same issues being discussed. And I don't know, for me, I find it frustrating that we're not seeing these perennial problems actually being solved. Why is that? There's gridlock in Washington. The bar has been so lowered now. I've been serving there now for 7 years. And throughout the time that I've served there, the bar for performance or success has been so lowered that Congress actually just passing a budget and appropriations bill to keep the lights on and the doors open in our government is seen as a great sign of success. And more years than not that I have been there, Congress has failed to do that. So you see a temporary funding bill, and for those who are directly impacted either with the government employees at the state, local, or federal level, or if you're a nonprofit that relies on funding of some sort, there's so many, the post office, I mean, there's so many different areas that are impacted when this basic responsibility of Congress is not met. What to speak of the many other issues and challenges that we should be addressing as a country. We deserve better. We must do better so that we are actually solving problems, so that our leaders in government, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, whatever the party affiliation is, that we have that sense of unity and mission and purpose, and that mission being one of service to the people of our country. We are unfortunately terribly divided right now, and seemingly ever increasingly so, based on political lines, who you voted for, who you didn't vote for, racial, ethnic, religious, social, so many different things that we're kind of being put into different boxes, separating us, forgetting too often what it is that unites us, what it is that brings us all together, that connects us as Americans. I think this is what we have to get back to the foundation, get back to what is written within our Constitution and Bill of Rights, to remember, hey, we're all Americans. We begin to heal our nation and bridging these divides by treating each other with respect, by being able to have real conversation and dialogue, recognizing that just like in our own families or at our job or at school, yeah, we're gonna disagree on some things. Maybe it's a few things, maybe it's a lot of things, but we can still and we must still have conversation and dialogue and be able to do so with that foundation of respect, to disagree without being disagreeable, to be able to be connected around that common ground and that common purpose. This is something that we so desperately need in the halls of Washington, and that leaders in Washington can look to our men and women in uniform for inspiration. Something that I experienced firsthand when I left Hawaii. I grew up in Hawaii, and we have the most diverse state in the nation, and a culture built around aloha, which is really respect. And so growing up in that atmosphere, I'm very, very grateful for. And then going to South Carolina for basic training, showing up and standing in a room, not maybe just a little bit larger than this, with people from all across the country, all walks of life, total strangers. I went there alone. I didn't have any friends who went with me. But without even having to say any word, because of what? One thing that we all had in common, that we're enemies, foreign and domestic, and to be willing to lay our lives down to do so. That same sense of unity that we felt there in basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, continued through our deployments overseas to the Middle East. Because what? Even though, yeah, we'll have conversations, we'll have, I remember there was drill sergeants at basic training who were Republican. They were giving me a hard time for being a Democrat. They were joking around and saying different things and trying to convince me to think otherwise. But at the end, beginning and the end of the day, really what it came down to was we had a respect for each other because of that decision that we made to serve. It's that culture of service and unity that we need in our government to be able to overcome those differences and solve problems, deliver results. More and more I hear from people cynicism that this is even possible, that we have become so divided as a country that it doesn't seem like there is a path forward towards being able to bridge those divides. And this is heartbreaking because we must. Failure is not an option. In 161 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave a speech centered around delivering this warning to our country at that time that a house divided against itself cannot stand. That warning rings true for us today here. I just went back and reread that speech that he delivered, and at the end of the speech, he said, "We shall not fail. If we stand strong, we shall not fail." He's really speaking to all of us. If we, as Americans, stand strong, we shall not fail. And so it's really about finding practical ways in our everyday lives to be able to do this, to be able to bridge these divides that are tearing our house, tearing our country apart. I was elected into Congress in 2012 and was one of 84 new members of Congress at that time, a freshman Democrat coming from Hawaii, Republican, strong Republican majority in the House of Representatives, and immediately had to really ask myself this question that I'm posing to all of us here tonight about how to, practically speaking, bridge those divides in a very hyper-partisan Congress, because I went there to do a job, to serve my constituents, to get things done. And I was not at all interested in just standing on the sidelines and waiting for my party to take over to be able to do the work that I set out to do. And so I started thinking with a very basic level, how to reach out to people, how to make friends as quickly as possible, people who I could work with, people who I could talk to about the issues that my constituents were most concerned about. So I started the most universal language that transcends all other divides is food. Agree? Yeah, raise your hand if you agree. Yeah. Who said water? I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Water too. Food's a little more fun. Water is necessary to survive. Food's a little bit more fun. So I asked my mother, who makes this amazing macadamia nut toffee, if she would make 434 boxes for every single member of Congress. And I asked if she would make 435 larger boxes for the staff of every member of Congress. She's back in Hawaii on the other end of the phone. Pause for a moment before she committed to this small favor that I asked of her. But she understood why it was important. She thought it was a good idea. And so as she was in Hawaii, she was starting to stir her 2 pots of toffee at the same time on the stove, chopping the macadamia nuts, pouring the toffee. My dad was being very helpful to her by supervising And being the quality control, he took one slice out of every pan that she poured to make sure it was okay. And they were doing this, I was in DC and just started handwriting notes to every one of my colleagues, learning more about them in the process, their background, their experience, and where they were from, and signing off every note saying, I look forward to serving with you. We started to deliver these gifts of aloha to my colleagues and very quickly got responses. People who I normally would not have the opportunity to interact with because they serve on different committees or they're from different parts of the country. They started finding me just to say thank you. Many of them saying, I ate all the candy, can I get more before I have to go home this weekend? And then the most important thing was, then they asked, tell me what your constituents are most concerned about. What are the issues that you want to start to work on here in Congress? And it opened that door to being able to have a conversation to where they're saying, hey, thank you. I look forward to working with you. No preconditions, no purity test, no, well, I'm only just going to talk to people in my team and not talk to anybody else. No, reaching out to every single person, coming from a place of sincere respect and a desire to serve together. And this laid a very strong foundation that allowed me to be effective as a member of Congress, as a Democrat in the minority with a Republican majority, to get things done, to get legislation passed, to being able to impact and pass amendments to important bills that Congress was considering, even when everybody who knew what they were doing said it would be impossible. It opened those doors to being able to have those conversations, whereas I would call my Republican colleagues and say, I need your support on my bill. A, they would answer my call, and B, they knew that when I talked to them about an issue that I cared very much about, that I was telling them the truth, that I wasn't trying to cheat them or screw them over or get them to do something that was anything other than what it was. Because of this foundation built on respect and trust, where at the end of it, sometimes we disagree and we say, you know what, I'm really sorry, but I disagree. I can't be with you on that. And other ones, they say, hey, I never thought of it from that perspective before. You've given me something to think about. I agree. I can support it. But all of this only being possible because A, willing to have the conversation, and B, that it was a conversation based on that foundation of respect. This is the culture of leadership that I will bring to the White House, to make it so that our White House is one that represents respect and integrity and honor, one that represents a beacon of light for every single American. Not just those who agree with me, not just those who are like me or think like me, but every single American. And set that culture of leadership, of working with leaders in Congress from both parties, bringing them, inviting them over to the White House, making it so that it's not what it is now and what it has been for so long, where it breaks headline news when congressional leaders are invited to the White House. It makes news because it hardly ever happens. Again, I go back to just our everyday lives. How could you go to work every day and be productive if you never have a conversation with your coworkers? It'd be pretty difficult. And we wonder why there's so much gridlock in Washington. It comes down to leadership, leaders who are solely focused on putting service above self, putting the well-being and the interests of the American people in our country above all else. This is really what is at the heart of what must change in our government to solve problems, because, I could tell you I've got 25 plans to solve the top 25 problems in this country, and they could be the greatest plans in the world. But they would not be worth the paper they're printed on unless I am able, as president, to work with Congress to get this legislation passed, to build the support amongst people across our country, to get this legislation passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. In order to heal our nation and bridge these divides, it requires action from every single one of us. Because we are those first three words in the Constitution. We the people. We the people. That is as much a reminder to us about the importance of our voices in this democracy as it is a reminder to our leaders of who they are responsible to serve. So with that, I'd like to open it up to your questions. I wanted to start our conversation here tonight on that note because it really is, to me, what is at the heart of how we together begin to forge this path forward. And as you think about the question that you want to ask, we've got a couple of microphones that are going to be coming around here. I'd love it if you could also add or open your comment with sharing with us something that you are hopeful for, whether it's a change you're hopeful for. Or last night we had a similar conversation in Portsmouth, and someone said, I hope Tom Brady does really well this year and we win. So whatever. Whatever your hope is, I think it's so important that in the noise and the chaos and the anger and the vitriol that we're too often surrounded by, especially in the world of politics or on cable news or on social media, let's start this New Year's off on a positive note by sharing with each other what our hope is as we head into this new year. So who'd like to start us off?
I guess I'll start by saying after all of like you were talking about, the division and hatred and all from the current administration, I'm for more unity in our country because we are all Americans. And I think we all want good for our country, and I hope that we can work together for that.
Thank you.
My question is, I have 5 children. My oldest has been blessed with an apprenticeship, and my second has joined the Air Force. And my question is, raising 5 kids is not inexpensive, and the cost of education for college and stuff is very expensive in our country right now. And I don't think it's fair, frankly, to ask everyone to pay for my kids' college. But I am curious to know, what are your thoughts about how to make college more affordable?
Thank you. And I want to read what's on your shirt because I think it's really awesome. Her shirt says, "Some people never meet their hero. I raised mine." You've got the Air Force logo on there. That's so cool. Thank you. Thank you very much. And your question and your comment kind of points to a few different things here that I think is, as there's a lot of talk about the cost of higher education, really I think we've got to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. You mentioned your oldest son. He's here? You got into an apprenticeship?
Yeah, plumbing.
Plumbing, awesome. And that's kind of, I think, really where we should focus our attention to in graduating from high school is really, what do you want to do? What do you want to learn? What kind of skills do you want to develop? And seeing and recognizing that every one of us is unique, and some of us want to go in and pursue a bachelor's degree or a higher degree. Others, apprenticeship, vocational training. Others, I've met some incredible high school kids who are graduating and starting their own business straight out of high school. Others who are choosing this service. Others going into AmeriCorps and taking time to figure out really who they are and what they want to do with their lives. And I think this is where how do we make it more accessible and affordable for our young people to then begin to pursue the path or career that they're choosing for themselves. So a lot of the conversation now is about the student debt crisis that exists, and it's a real thing that's affecting generations of people. Where kids who are in college today, I met a young woman yesterday who went into the bank in her community here in New Hampshire. She's going to nursing school right now, and she was trying to apply for her very first credit card ever. And she was turned away. They rejected her. And she said, why? Like, well, you don't have any credit. I know, that's why I'm trying to get a credit card, to start to build good credit. They said, well, no, we can't give you a credit card because you have too much student debt. It's like, well, how, like, rock in a hard place. What am I supposed to do in this situation? Without addressing the high cost of education and tuition and how inaccessible it is to a lot of people because of that cost, even if student debt was completely wiped clean today, we still would not be solving the problem for tomorrow, for your younger kids who will be going up and maybe going to college in a few years or whatever the case may be. And so I think that's really where we focus on the deeper issue of rising cost of higher education and how inaccessible it is for people who would like to pursue apprenticeships. I know I've talked to some of the different labor unions who say that they open up, whatever it is, 50 slots maybe a year in some cases, but they have over 1,000 applicants who are trying to get into these programs, how difficult it is. So congratulations to you. But looking at how do we invest more in apprenticeships, vocational training, community college, certificates, and making it so that we're leveraging technology to be able to increase that access and affordability and bringing down the cost of higher education. Having some accountability there for schools that are taking federal taxpayer dollars on if their tuition is increasing and increasing and increasing every year, what are students getting as a result of that? Are they getting better and better outcomes? I think there are two things that Congress should do immediately that won't require the next election to wait around for. And number one is that student debt should qualify for bankruptcy just like every single other kind of debt that we may carry. I think it sends completely the wrong message that student debt is the only debt that is not included as one applies for bankruptcy. And secondly, that interest rates, both those from the government as well as from the private sector, continue to increase. Where I know a lot of my friends who are trying to pay off their student debt, all they can afford to do is pay the interest every month, leaving them with the certainty of a lifetime of debt that they'll never actually be able to pay down the principal of that. So I don't think that student debt for education should be a profit-making business where you're charging ever-increasing interest rates. I think by focusing on this in a very comprehensive way, we can begin to get to accomplishing the objective of making sure that someone graduating from high school is able to get the skills and the tools they need to be successful. And the last thing I'll say on this that requires a little bit more of a culture shift in our country is that the expectation now is that in order to be successful or get a good paying job, you must have a bachelor's and oftentimes a master's degree. I've seen it myself just when I graduated from high school, that if you choose not to go to college, you're like, oh, okay, what's wrong with you? That somehow you're less than because that's not the path you've chosen for yourself. I think from an employer basis, from a government basis, I think this is something that we as a society need to change so that someone who's choosing to go into apprenticeship or choosing whatever they're choosing to do with their lives, kudos, good job. Have at it, and that there is no sense of inequality as they're entering into their adulthood and in their lives. By getting rid of this stigma, I think we can do a lot more to open up a lot more opportunities to people. Yes.
Do you think that the land-grant colleges, we could encourage them?
Which ones?
Land-grant colleges, state college.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and build a really good training program. I don't know of too many electricians or plumbers that are going broke these days.
Yeah, I think there is more investment that we should be making into those universities. I have a bill in Congress that is looking to promote more investment in agriculture, in urban agriculture, in entrepreneurship, and being able to dedicate more resources in that direction.
I'm a graduate of a state college in Massachusetts. And as a veteran, I used to pay $100 per semester for tuition.
Yeah, things have changed, huh? Things have changed. Yes, we'll go to you, and we'll go to you next.
At the next level, great. At the next level, I enjoyed your story about how you were able to interact with Congress. But now at the White House, how are you going to be able to break into that mix of trying to get an entrenched Republican Party to deal with a Democratic president?
And what are you hopeful for, my friend?
I'm hopeful that it'll happen.
Okay. Fair enough. At a larger scale, it's doing exactly what I have been doing and what I did when I first got elected to Congress. I think the pressure points come from both directions. It comes from setting that culture of leadership at the top, of reaching out and building relationships with leaders in Congress and members of Congress from all different parts of the country, which is an ongoing thing of establishing those relationships, building that rapport, trying to establish that relationship based on trust. But it's also the pressure points that needs to come from the country. This is what I'm talking about. It's not just one person that can solve this, that this comes from every one of us, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or independent or libertarian. It's holding your elected leaders accountable, because ultimately they will listen to you more than anybody else. You have the power to hire and fire your elected leaders. Sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we forget that the power lies within our hands to be able to hire and fire and hold accountable our leaders and let them know that this is the expectation, that you don't put party politics ahead of you, the people, that you don't put your partisan interests ahead of the interests of the people of our country. You know, in order to solve any problem, it's going to, both for the short term and the long term, because even if you look at the short term, let's say that, let's say it's Democrats. I was elected president, we had a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. Great, we can push through legislation. But if it's done in a purely partisan way and 2 years later, the political winds shift and we lose the House or the Senate to Republicans, then what do you have? You have more gridlock, because then you have a whole group of people saying, hey, you've been ignoring us this whole time. Now you wanna come talk to me? Really? Well then, when it's convenient, when you want something from me, that's not how relationships work, right? It's about developing relationships based on respect, not just when it's convenient for you or comfortable for you, but it's about building those relationships that focus on, again, putting people first. There's no magic solution where I snap my fingers and we're immediately where we need to be. It takes time. It takes time. But at the core of it all, I think we just remember we're all people. We're all people. Every one of us. And so while the answer is not easy, it is actually very simple. Requires action every day, rooted in that foundation of who we are as Americans and our core motivation that we share, which is a care and love of country and for each other, our friends, our family, our community. That's how we make that change happen. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much. And I think the conversation about student loans is really important. I'm a student myself, and I do believe that we need to move towards public universities and colleges, and I believe that we should get rid of all student loan debt, because your children shouldn't be punished for wanting to seek a higher education, and neither should you. And I'm hopeful for a change in the way that our foreign policy is done, and I think that your campaign is based a lot off of trying to end the endless wars, right? And my question is about the issue of Israel-Palestine. Senator Sanders said recently he would leverage aid to Israel in order to pressure Israel into ending the occupation and building of illegal settlements on Palestinian land. Is this an action that you would pursue as president?
Yeah, I think that we have to see what role we can play in helping to encourage a productive path towards peace between Israel and Palestine. The issue of illegal occupations is one that I've long been concerned about and vocal about in Congress, supporting legislation that was denouncing and critical of this continued illegal occupation. There are many different actions that this administration has taken that I think have made it far more difficult for the leaders of Israel and Palestine to be able to get back to the negotiating table. That's become very, very clear. So aid is one point of leverage that can be used, but I think we've got to look at this from a comprehensive view on how we can best be constructive and helpful mediators towards encouraging these parties to get back on the path towards peace. Unfortunately, we're so far from that. It's a complex situation, it's a complex environment, and the longer that this status quo continues, the more people are continuing to suffer in a devastating way.
Hi, thank you very much. One of the, in the early part of your political career, one of the positions I think that you were noted for was opposition to same-sex marriage. And I believe that your position has changed on that, as maybe has much of the country. And I know that you've talked in the past about why and how your position changed. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how it was that you could have opposed same-sex marriage in the first place. Like, what were the motivations that allowed you to hold that belief back in the early part of your career?
Yeah, look, like you said, much of the country's views have changed on this issue over time. And look, I was very young and I was raised in a pretty socially conservative household. And that informed my views back then. Bottom line, throughout my time in Congress, obviously I grew up and had my own experiences and formed my views based on those experiences, and through my 7 years in Congress have been very steadfast in my support for equality. When we say the Pledge of Allegiance, when we talk about our Constitution, we're talking about equality and justice for all, liberty and justice for all. That means for all, and have reflected that commitment through legislation and actions that we've taken in Congress to ensure that that equality is obviously applied across the board to include our LGBTQ fellow Americans.
The question I have, you spoke earlier about we the people.
Yes.
And it just coincidentally over the last few weeks, I've been listening to the impeachment hearings. And I just hear the hate and the vitriol that exists in Washington, and how the two-party system to me seems doomed to failure. It's already failed. I've been rereading Thomas Paine's writings, and the same writing concerns he had in 1763 are exactly what's happening now. And I just start looking at the European model in coalition governments, 3 tri-party and 4 party. We have coalition governments. Could you ever see something like that happening in the United States, to make people have to agree with one another? They'd be forced to come to terms. And maybe the type of prime minister type thing where you don't necessarily serve for it could be 3 years, it could be 6 years of vote of confidence. Do you see anything like that?
Good question. And I honestly, I haven't given the answer to that question much thought to give you an informed answer. I will say with our two-party system, I think it is broken, and it's largely broken because of the outsized amount of power that the two parties have, making it impossible for really for there to be a viable independent or a third party, or there to be an option for people in that area. and we look at how that power is leveraged, a lot of it comes from money. You look at the campaign finance laws and what contributions are allowed to be given for us as candidates for federal office, whether it's for Congress or for president. The limit that any person can give to my campaign is $2,800 for the primary and $2,800 for the general election. That's the max. But the parties don't really have a maximum. So if you wanted to write a $10 million check to one party or another, you could do so. And how that impacts the proceedings in Congress is, especially for those who are representing swing districts or who have tough elections every single year, there is that leverage point. Well, if you don't fall in line, if you don't toe the line, if you don't do what we ask you to do, we're not going to be there for you to buy $5 million worth of commercials to support your campaign. You'll be on your own. So that rather than having elected leaders in Congress considering legislation based on its merits, based on their conscience, based on what's in the best interest of their district, they're left with this question and this pressure. Well, do I want to get this help, or do I want to do what I think is the right thing to do for my district or for my country or whatever the issue may be? And so I think this is a major issue area that with our current system that really needs to be addressed so that we really do have elected representatives who are representing the interests of the people.
Just, kind of speaking to that, so why don't we, when you look at the United Kingdom, they have what, so many weeks they can campaign? Is it 6 or 8 or 12 weeks, something like that? Wonderful idea.
Yeah, there's a limit, right? They can only campaign for that limited
Since
period
August,
of
I've
time.
been watching political ads 5 nights a week.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know enough the details of their system. I know that there's a very limited amount of time. The question that I've had that I've not gotten an answer to is there's also very strict limits on what you